Hey everyone, John Baronick here. As we all know, during the winter months, all of us have a maintenance list of things to do on our boats, whether it's trailer maintenance or boat upgrades or boat maintenance. So part of my list this year includes I had to take my 360 off, my Mega 360, and send it back to get repaired. And I have another unit that needs some repair that I'm going to try to do at home. I would not recommend doing this if your unit is still in warranty. Hummingbird has an outstanding customer service and warranty and repair service. My Mega 360 got there in 2 days. Within 2 days they shipped it back and it's on its way back now. But this unit is out of warranty, so I'm going to try to save myself the $300 or $400 service charge to repair this and make a fix. And hopefully, if it works out, it may be a way for you guys to save some money down the road if you have a similar issue. All right, so what we're trying to fix here is, what I have in front of me is two Hummingbird Helix 12s. I've run 4 of them all together on my boat, and this one, basically what we're looking at is the 2 little tabs here that hold your quick disconnect. They, get this on the right way. They no longer hold it. Okay, so they plug in, but there's nothing to hold the clips. And this is one that works properly. You can hear it snap into place. So here you can see we have the 2 little tabs here. And here they're both broken off. It started out with one of them breaking off and then the other one broke off last year. So we're going to try to do a fix. What we're going to do is we're going to take a Dremel and we're going to kind of grind out a little bit of an area here to give the epoxy a chance to grip and hold on to the unit. But before we do all that, or after we grind this little area out here, then we're going to take some wax and basically we're going to make a form. So we're going to take some wax, melt it, and let it fill this hole here. The wax won't get hot enough to hurt anything. We'll fill it all the way to the top here. And then what we'll do is we'll take and scrape out a little area where the tab would be, just like over here. And then once we get all that done and the wax is nice and cool and we get that, that form, quote unquote, made, then we will take some good old JB Weld epoxy that we have right here, and we'll go ahead and mix that up and stick it in the mold. And when we're done, we'll just carefully scrape all the wax out from behind it. And at that point, we should have 2 tabs that will actually hold the plug in place. And hopefully, just for a grand total of about 10 bucks, we'll have this fixed. So we're gonna get started by dremeling out just this little area here so the epoxy has a better chance of holding to the back side of the unit. And then we'll melt some wax and see if we can get those 2 holes filled with wax and make our form. This is a very precise procedure right here. 50 years old, I now need glasses to do it with. Okay, so what you can see right now is, if you look, you can see I've just dremeled out a little bit of extra cavity there to give the epoxy something to hold on to and then have the tab stick into the hole a little bit. So right now we'll clean that out real good and we'll melt some wax and put that in there and let that form up. Okay, so what we have here is just a plain old regular unscented white candle. Walmart special. We're gonna get it going, and then we're gonna melt some wax, and probably take a little while. Get that wax melting real good, and then just let it drip into that hole, and get them both filled up, and then that'll serve as the base for our form to do the epoxy tab. Okay, so now we just gotta let that cool real good, let the wax harden up real good, and then we can scrape off the excess and make sure that I got a little bit of wax on the area that I had dremeled out, so we'll dremel that back out again, and then just scrape a little tab form into the wax. And then we'll mix up our epoxy and stick it in there, and then hopefully after we do that, tomorrow morning or tomorrow at some point, we'll be able to scrape out all the excess wax, and we'll get this plug to sit right in there and stay put. Okay, so we cheated a little bit, stuck the unit in the fridge to get the wax to harden up real well. The first thing we're going to do is we're just going to skim the wax nice and level across the top of that opening if we can. So we have a nice level surface to play with and create our form. Okay, so now we have a nice level area to start with to create our form. And one of the things that I noticed, and I actually consider it somewhat of a slight design flaw, is these tabs here, if you'll notice, they don't run all the way to the rest of the back here. So it's a very fragile tab, so to speak. If they had run this all the way down both sides, then it would be supported on 3 sides and a lot less likely to break. And if you look at how the plug goes in, the plug actually covers the whole entire hole. So it would make sense to make the tab the whole length. I don't know why they wouldn't. It would be a lot more sturdy than just, you know, making a little tab that's only supported on one end. So what we're going to do is we're going to modify this. As you can see, I kind of backfilled a little bit where I had dremeled out. So we're going to dremel that back out again, clean that up. And then I'm going to dremel a little area here and a little area here. And we're going to run this tab all the way across, hopefully to give it a little more support rather than just having it stick out from this side here. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to attempt to make the form, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scribe a little area that I want to make the tab, so I know exactly where I'm going to be. And again, I'm going to err on the side of the tab being a little longer than it probably needs to be, so that if I have to, I can always cut it down a little bit with the Dremel. Too short, and then having to Dremel the whole thing out and start from scratch. Now, the only potential downfall of this is that epoxy, when it's curing, can tend to heat up. But I'm hoping that it's going to be such a small section of epoxy that the heat's not going to be enough to melt the wax to really make that much of a difference. I want the tab to be thick enough to hold it. Do is, since we scraped more wax out, we'll just run this Dremel really lightly around here just to make sure we don't have any leftover wax. It's going to keep us from getting a good bond. Okay, so it looks like we should be good to go to try to mix up some epoxy and stick it in there and see how it ends up. Alright, so what we're going to do is mix up some epoxy, some JB Weld steel reinforced epoxy. Hopefully it'll get a good enough grip where it'll hold it. Generally speaking, there's not a lot of pressure on these plugs to break those off. This one happened to have been mounted at the bow, and the cables were twisted in a funky way. It hit some rough water, and that's why the tabs, I think, broke off. A couple of keys to mixing epoxy. Some people will mix it on cardboard. I tend to not want to do that. I'll mix it on some plastic or metal, mostly because I don't want any of the chemicals in the epoxy to be absorbed into the cardboard, and then it actually decreasing the chemical process and not letting the epoxy get hard. So this is an epoxy that comes in a tube that's supposed to shoot out an equal amount. So what we're going to do is we're just going to shoot out until both come out, and then we're going to cut that off, and then that's not going to be what we're going to use because we want to make sure we get an equal amount. If I was to mix that right there, the gray is the hardener, and it wouldn't harden at all like that. So we want to make sure we're getting equal amounts, just like that. And this is a reusable tube, so we make sure we put it back on the right way so that we can use it later. And again, I'm going to use a metal screwdriver to mix this rather than the wood stick that they give you. And the key is to just make sure you mix it up really well until it's all one solid color. And this is well more than I'll need, but if you try to mix it in too small of a batch, you tend to not get enough hardener or whatever the chemical reaction that needs to take place for it to harden correctly. It doesn't usually happen as well. So, mix more than you need. Okay, got it mixed up pretty well. That on the counter because Mama will kill me. Alright, so now basically it's just like pouring a fiberglass in a mold, or shooting fiberglass in a mold, or anything similar like that. You just take some of this epoxy and we're just going to stick it right down in the hole that we just made until we've got it completely flush with the unit. And we can always trim this a little bit if we need to, sand it down, make it smoother so that the plug will fit on there. Right now we just want to make sure we get it completely filled, and we're hoping that the heat from the epoxy curing doesn't melt the wax and then we end up with it running all down into the hole. We're hoping to avoid that. These plugs actually have quite a bit of play. Even if that stuck up just a little bit, the plug would still work and still keep the connections. But you want to overfill just in case as it cures, it shrinks a little bit. Sometimes that happens, so we'll overfill it just a little bit. And if we have to, we'll take a file or something to run it down a little bit. What I'm trying to do right now is to make sure at least the edge of where that tab is going to be is nice and smooth, and it's a fairly straight line. Edge that I made in my wax. And again, these plugs aren't made to NASA specs or anything like that, so you do have a little bit of leeway when you're trying to make these tabs. They don't have to be necessarily perfect. All right, so now, as you can see, I've got the two forms, and the epoxy's pretty level across the forms. And so we'll let this cure up overnight, and then tomorrow morning we'll dig out all the wax and see how we did. See if it holds up the way that we hope. And if so, then it'll save $400 and some time going back to Hummingbird. And if it doesn't, it cost us 30 minutes of time, $10 to try to do it ourselves. And hopefully I get at least one season out of it. Maybe next year I can upgrade to some Helix units or something like that. But for now, we'll try to get through the season with this. So hopefully we'll get back to you tomorrow. We'll see how this holds up, and hopefully it holds up well. All right, so we've let the epoxy set up for a couple of days here. We're going to pick out the wax and do a little fine tuning on the tabs that are left and see if our plug will fit and see how it holds up. I'll have to wear glasses again. So what I've got here is just a little scribe to kind of start picking the wax out, hopefully without catching the epoxy and getting it. do a little small grinding, what we have to do is make sure that the hooks here aren't going to be pushed out because I've got too much epoxy in there. And basically, if the tabs are too big, so we're going to grind them down just a little bit. All right, so it will go on and come off. And it's just a matter of if it's going to hook. And right now, it doesn't look like it's going to. Probably because either the tabs are too thick, or I've got a little bit of buildup here where it's not quite flush with this. So I have to be very careful. Oh, and we have two little, you can see there's two little knobs here. These are like little aligning pins. So my option is going to be to either re-drill those so that it goes down high enough, or for where I'm going to put this, just grind these off completely. They're not particularly necessary, so that it'll go down far enough. That looks like that's what's holding me right now. But let's see if we can't figure out a way to re-drill those. But it looks like it'll go in there and it'll sit. It's just a matter of getting those pins so that it'll go down low enough so the hooks will catch. So I can see a little black mark there and a little black mark there. That's where my little hole needs to be. Looks like even the tabs are still a little thick. So this one on this side is catching. This one probably has just a little bit too much buildup. So we're going to grind that down just a little bit. Looks nice, and a little bit of grinding, a little bit of finesse. But now she locks right on there. Shouldn't go anywhere. All done. $400 saved.